Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Geraghty of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. There's more talk of Russia today. The summit was over on Friday. We'll get into that in the first martini. We'll also be talking quite a bit about MSNBC no longer being MSNBC and what that rebrand kind of looks like, both in comical and potentially productive ways. And then we'll also look at kind of the insane conversation that played out on a New York Times podcast with the columnist, the sane columnist, Ross Douthat, but his guest was insane. And so we'll get into that about what they think the future of the United States government ought to look like. But first, Jim, the big news, Garrity for governor. No, it's not Jim Geraghty. It is Stacy Garrity, the Republican state treasurer of Pennsylvania, teeing up what could be, according to Fox News, a competitive race against incumbent Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro in 2026. Now, Jim, I have to admit, until this morning, never heard of Stacy Garrity. I don't pay a lot of attention to state treasurer races. Maybe I should pay a little more attention. But what I'm imagining is one of two scenarios here as we get further and further into the 2026 campaign. Either the Garrity campaign is going to be this well-oiled machine that surges to the nomination and puts pressure and maybe even beats Josh Shapiro in a midterm election year, or it's going to be a complete train wreck and all you're going to hear is, I got to tell you, Garrity has no idea how to run this operation, or the wheels are falling off of this thing. So
what a flop Garrity was. Yeah, we're going to get a lot of that, I suspect. So just on basis of that, I need Stacy Garrity to become the next big GOP superstar. If you go out and you win the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania, you're a very big deal, and you'll probably be on a national ticket. So here's the problem. Overall, very solid record on taxes, on spending, on values, on crime, on all kinds of matters relating to the state government of Pennsylvania. I want to support this candidate, but there's a problem. It's spelled Geraghty, not the anglicized Garrity. But maybe it's somebody at Ellis Island who's like, that's too hard to spell. I was talking to somebody the other day where they talk about microaggressions, and some people say, sometimes they misspell my name, and I consider that to be a disrespect to my heritage. And I was like, dude, in that case, I've been, just my heritage has been disrespected every day of my life. My dad once had a credit card that got returned to him because the thief couldn't spell Garrity. That's a sign of how hard your name is to spell. So I understand why people went with the Garrity list. I think there was a Philadelphia Eagles tight end named Garrity at one point. Greg Garrity, I want to say. But again, spelled in my mind incorrectly. The correct spelling is the, long, lots of silent numbers, lots of silent letters, nonsense that I have after my first name. And so good luck, Stacy Garrity. You'd get another 5 points in the polls if you just had an extra GH in there.
Exactly right. So don't embarrass. They're not even family members, but don't embarrass the name is basically what Jim's saying here. I will say, though, every year when we watch Groundhog Day, on Groundhog Day, there is an actress in that movie with the last name of Garrity spelled exactly like yours. She's the Nancy Taylor character that he asks her high school and her English teacher and all that. So I don't know if you're related to her or not, but that's the only other place I've seen that name.
It's always an exciting moment when you watch the credits of Groundhog Day. I believe she was also in Don Juan DeMarco with Johnny Depp at some point. So no relation.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's talk about our first great sponsor, and that is OneSkin. And of course, you need to protect your skin from the sun. But what if you could protect it from things like collagen loss or inflammation, and even repair some of the damage you did when you were younger? Well, the good news is that you can, and the answer is OneSkin. And as I've mentioned before, Mrs. Corombos enjoys the fact that it's light and it absorbs into the skin very, very easily.
OneSkin's OS1 peptide works at the cellular level to improve key aging biomarkers while reducing the visible signs of aging, including lines, wrinkles, and sagging skin. OneSkin's entire research and development process is run in-house, strictly adhering to the rigor of the scientific process from start to finish. OneSkin believes the purpose of skincare is not just to improve how you look, but to optimize your skin's biology at the cellular level so it's more resilient to the aging process.
OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company, and by focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. For a limited time, you can try OneSkin with 15% off using the code 3ML at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code 3ML. And after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. So please support this show and tell them that we sent you. All right, Jim, as we mentioned on Friday, the Alaska summit took place too late in the day for us to comment on. It didn't start till 3:30 our time and went longer than expected. No deal struck. Everyone seems to think it was productive, whatever that means. The media, of course, wanted to know what concessions Russia was willing to make for a ceasefire deal or even an end to the war. Both sides are pretty tight-lipped about that. Now, Zelensky's in Washington today with a bunch of other European leaders to kind of talk about, I assume, what happened in Alaska, but also, what are they willing to do? What kind of offer should be acceptable, not acceptable going forward here? And so you got some folks saying now that the deal's up to Zelensky when Trump said that now he's going to bully Zelensky into whatever Russia wants. Other people saying, no, that's not the case at all. So your general take on this was that no deal was better than a bad deal, but no deal is also worse than a good deal. So where do we stand here?
Yeah, I saw some folks like Newt Gingrich saying, oh, why is everyone rushing to judgment after this summit? Like, well, Trump did say before the summit that within the first few minutes, he would know whether Putin was serious about peace. And he also said that if he did not get a ceasefire deal at this summit, then Russia would face very serious consequences. So the expectations are in large part set by the president himself in his comments before the summit. So I don't think it's unreasonable for people to say, okay, what was the result of that? I think the fact that they did not take questions afterwards was a sign that there was not really any big positive announcement to come out of this. So why is this not a bad martini in my eyes? Because it could have very well been Trump saying, this is great, let's go ahead with this, let's sign on the dotted line. I found it frustrating, but it very much could have been worse. And for in the post summit interview with Sean Hannity, Trump said that his serious consequences for Russia are still on the table. Okay, I'd like to see what he expects to see between now and some other date in the future. He said that he always knew he wasn't going to get a ceasefire deal out of the first meeting, which is not the messaging that we had going into this, but fine, okay. It was very unlikely you were going to get to the table and Trump was going to do it. And let's also point out, the part I absolutely loved was Putin gets off the plane. Didn't necessarily love the literal and metaphorical red carpet treatment, but fine. And then a B-2 bomber flies right over them with warplanes escorting and kind of a demonstration. Hey, remember, that's the one that took out the Iranian nuclear program. All right, so just remember what we can do. All right, just to remember who you're talking with. It was actually I thought it was a wonderful and very reflective of Trump, very television and visually theatrical demonstration that America holds a bunch of cards. Frustratingly, there was no, I don't understand how you get Putin to end the aggression and to accept any type of ceasefire deal and a lasting peace if you're doing it all carrots and no sticks. And I'd like to see more sticks be brought to the table on this. We'll see what happens. He's meeting with Zelensky today. He's meeting with European leaders today. The other thing that I feel like needs to be emphasized here, and you hear this from Zelensky and the Ukrainians quite a bit, they keep saying that's just that they want peace, they want a just peace. And if we end up with a ceasefire and there's the intervening years after that ceasefire, Russia uses the time and, lightening of sanctions to rebuild its military even more, and you end up with an invasion in 2027, 2028, 2020, some point down the road, then this is not a victory. Then this is not a good outcome. We are looking for one that will have stable peace. There was a claim from Witkoff on the weekend shows that Vladimir Putin is willing to live with some sort of Article 5-like arrangement where the U.S. and other European countries are making security guarantees to the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine. I'll be honest, I find that hard to believe. If it is, wonderful, and would represent a major concession on the part of Putin. But this is so out of character from previous Russian negotiating positions, it's kind of hard to believe this is something that they're either A, genuinely willing to offer, or B, an offer that they intend to honor. Because I don't quite get why, in bringing Ukraine into NATO, which, by the way, I think almost everyone left, right, and center would say that's not something we can have on the table right now. To be a member of NATO, you need to have stable borders. You need to have clear, secure borders. So NATO wants to know exactly which territory it has to defend if, heaven forbid, there is a conflict. And as a result of that, you need to have set borders. So that's not something we could even talk about anytime soon in my mind. But the idea that they would sign off on an Article 5 again, we're kind of wondering if something's getting lost in the translation. I can't help but remember that, Witkoff relied on the Russian translator when he met with Putin earlier this year. If that's the case, great. And maybe that is how you end up with a deal that nobody likes, but everybody can live with. The idea that Ukraine makes territorial concessions, which they're really not going to like, but the remaining portion of Ukraine, 80% of the pre-invasion borders, does have its security guaranteed with the United States and let's say the UK, France, and a couple other NATO allies. Maybe that's where this can end with, and maybe this is where you can stop the war. We'll see how the negotiations go. I have a sneaking suspicion that we're a long ways away from a working end to the war. But again, could have been worse. The president could have signed off on anything that was put in front of him. And we'll see how things go from here.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes today. And like you said, where it goes from here. So, all right. Well, how well did you treat your liver this weekend? Some of you probably better than others. But did you know the liver is the second largest organ in your body? And it's responsible for more than 500 functions. But for some reason, liver health doesn't always get the attention it deserves. But now there's Dose for your liver. It was formulated to cleanse your liver of unwanted elements, aid digestion, and maintain your body's filter.
Your liver is the second largest organ in your body. Really, it is. Even if you're bragging. It acts as your body's filter, flushing out unwanted elements and breaking down what you consume into essential nutrients. Dose's science-backed formula promotes liver function, aids digestion, eases bloating, and can even boost your energy levels.
So support your health with Dose Daily. Save 25% on your first month when you subscribe at dosedaily.co/3ml or enter the code 3ml at checkout. Please note the 25% discount applies only to subscription orders and not one-time purchases. Cancel anytime, no hassle. That's dosedaily.co/3ml to get 25% off your first monthly subscription with code 3ml. All right, Jim, on to our second martini. You said this was partially good. I think this was also partially crazy given some of the reactions to this. But MSNBC is not really going anywhere, but it is changing names. And so Brian Stelter, that always right down the middle objective reporter, formerly of CNN, is he back with CNN? He's on there a lot now. I don't even know what the deal is. Yeah, he's chief media analyst at CNN now. That punishment lasted a long time. But he says as the cable news channel MSNBC splits up with NBC News, it is also dropping the NBC from its name. Later this year, it will become MS Now, which stands for My Source for News, Opinion, and the World. And it's got like this, seems like a little flag with two little red lines there, and the rest of it is white. And so a lot of different reactions. Some people are hoping things are better on this channel. Other people not expecting much. I don't know who this guy is, but my favorite reaction was from a guy named Jorge Bonilla, who says, terrible branding. The flag looks too much like DC's, and who in their right mind wants multiple sclerosis now? So,
Greg, earlier this year, or I guess it was late last year, I was on CNN up in New York. And this was when Elon Musk was making noise about purchasing MSNBC. And everybody envisioned the idea of him firing everyone and replacing it with all of Elon's buddies and right-of-center influencers and stuff. And this one of the other guests was just up in arms about this and thought this was the worst possible thing. It would be the end of democracy, blah, blah, blah. And I said, how would you feel about Bill Gates having partial ownership of a cable news network? And the person said, I have no problem with that, because they didn't see Bill Gates as being ideological. First of all, if you'd heard about Bill Gates releasing mosquitoes into a crowded conference room because he wanted to demonstrate the potential threat of malaria, I mean, that's kind of supervillain stuff, right? I mean, not even Dr. Doom releases, that kind of stuff. But so Bill Gates, I think he does have an ideology. I think he does, he's free to have it. But the idea that he's non-ideological. But the second, the MS in MSNBC is for Microsoft, and maybe this is a sign of demonstrating how Microsoft long since gave up its share of what was then an experimental partnership between NBC News and the then up-and-coming Microsoft Corporation. But, kind of news for the internet age and all the kind of stuff that they thought was going to be back then. But to me, it was a demonstration of people who making very authoritative statements about the cable news business don't know the history of these things at all. And the idea of, this has never happened before. Well, actually, we have had billionaires that have control over news organizations. Have you ever heard of this guy named Hearst? Have you ever heard,
Yeah.
Citizen Kane wasn't a documentary, but that was kind of the gist there, guys. So anyway, I actually think this is good news, in part because I feel like I could still see a difference between NBC News, as in NBC Nightly News, Meet the Press, stuff like that, and MSNBC. Now, does this mean that I think NBC News is the way I'd like it to be? No, I think it's still left of center. I noticed that Brian Stelter said down the middle NBC News. Oh, okay, right. But maybe this is the memories of growing up with Tom Brokaw or Tim Russert and Meet the Press and stuff like that. That there was a time when whatever liberal bias there was at NBC News was within normal parameters, right? It was kind of, MSNBC was the network of Keith Olbermann, the worst, you are the worst person in the world, and it was this left-wing rage in prime time. Lawrence O'Donnell, Joy Reid, Rachel Maddow, right? It was just this constant telling you how terrible everyone in the Republican world was. And you could argue, there's a distinction between Fox News, the news organization, and the opinion stuff that's in prime time. Yeah, that's where they're. But I know that there were people at NBC News who did not like what MSNBC was doing to the image of NBC News that had been there going back to, were they Huntley Brinkley hour way back when?
The Huntley Brinkley report, yep.
Right, they had a proud tradition that was, by the standards of today, down the middle. Probably there were people complaining about it back then too. But that MSNBC had become the Daily Kos in video programming, in video format. It was just this left-wing rage hour. And, oftentimes the ratings for that are not that great. Sometimes it's better than CNN has found itself in this troubled spot in which they're not the right-wing offering, but they're also not the left-wing offering, at least not in the style of MSNBC. And for lots of years, you and I have joked on this podcast that CNN is fire alarm television. When something blows up overseas, that's when you're watching CNN because they have the most foreign correspondents. You want to see what Clarissa Ward, what dangerous part of the world. And by the way, when I say you're going to dangerous parts of the world, then it really means something. But MSNBC had become far too left wing, and often I would also say kind of shoddy, kind of unhinged, kind of disconnected from reality, and often covering things that might be of interest to diehard left-wing progressives, but not as Trump rage and stuff like that. Just this general sense of it. So it's not surprising that NBC News would say, hey, if you can separate us, and you can give them a new name, so people stop, thinking we're them and they're us and vice versa, it's good for us. So there's a part of me that's great, go for it. By the way, very revealing, CNBC is staying the same, which I think is a demonstration, and I think most of us, as much as we love Rick Santelli reporting from, I believe it's the Chicago Stock Exchange, I just wish everyone behind him would quiet down. So the new economic numbers today are great. Would everyone please quiet down? Please, I'm on live television here. You ask the typical conservative, they have much less of a gripe with CNBC than they do with MSNBC. So I think this is good news for NBC News. This is good news for CNBC, and it's good for Ms. Now to become this own identity of crazy, irate, frothing at the mouth left-wing television.
Ms. Now, I didn't read it that way. So it's going to be like a girl boss,
feminist,
couple shows with that. Yeah. Rick Santelli, as far as I know, reports from the same location where Ferris Bueller and Cameron Fry visited on their day off. Remember they were doing all the hand gestures down to the guys on the floor, but not quite how they do it anymore, but same place, pretty sure. Anyway, if you have a high blood pressure after watching MSNBC or MS Now or Ms. Now or whatever this is supposed to be now, maybe it's time to check in with your doctor. And if you don't really have a doctor, whether it's for your heart or for anything else, try ZocDoc. Both Jim and I have used ZocDoc. Both Jim and I love ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment.
Now, I'll bet a significant chunk of our listenership is like, I really should go have that checked out. It's such a long way. Well, look, you can use ZocDoc to find a doctor's office that's really close to your home. That's how I used it. Found an optometrist that, practically a stone's throw from my house. So I no longer had the excuse. And so far, I have remarkable vision. With ZocDoc, you can book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty of medical care, from mental health to dental health, from primary care to urgent care, you name it. You can filter for doctors who take your insurance, are located nearby, are a good fit for any medical need you may have, and are highly rated by verified patients. And once you find the right doctor, you can see their actual appointment openings, choose a time slot that works for you, and click to instantly book a visit.
Yeah, both of us have had excellent experiences with ZocDoc. I know you will too. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And there's plenty of options today, but we go to a podcast conversation that Ross Douthat had with a columnist from the New Republic, a guy by the name of Osita Nwanevu. And basically, this guy from the New Republic pretty much wants to scrap the Constitution. The left, including this guy, has just this maniacal hatred of the Senate because they think it's unrepresentative. They think the filibuster makes it even more unrepresentative. He's talking about adding Puerto Rico and D.C. and all the territories to balance it out because, of course, on the left, if you're trying to save democracy, you got to squeeze in as many Democrats as possible, and that's why they want more states, so they get 2 more from each one. But they think the Senate is the most unfair body of all time, which shows that you don't understand the constitutional process back in the day. It's because states mattered, and states still matter. So, Jim, we're just talking about how the Democrats are trying to save democracy from Republicans who have the nerve and the gall to redraw congressional districts, but they're going to save it even more by, checking my notes, throwing out the Constitution, abolishing the Senate and the Electoral College.
Yeah, this was, by the way, I saw a bunch of folks on the right giving Ross grief about doing this interview, whereas I think this is a genuine public service. And for everyone was like, oh, you know, he's helped. This book would have gotten attention no matter what. The headline: Abolish the Senate, End the Electoral College, Pack the Court. Why the left can't win without a new constitution. Folks, that is not doing this guy a favor. That is not, you know, like that's all publicity is good publicity. Not necessarily, right? I think what this interview reveals, I'm assuming intentionally on Ross's part, unintentionally on the part of his guest from the New Republic, is that 90-some% of procedural complaints about how government works are basically code for, I'm not getting what I want, therefore the rules should be changed.
Yes.
But a lot of his complaints amount to, well, all these aspects of the Constitution are not democratic. Small d, right?
Yeah. And
to which the meme of the bearded guy on the right coming aloft and saying, in profile and saying, yes, that is exactly. We are not a pure democracy. We are not meant to be a pure democracy. The founding fathers were very afraid of mob rule. They were very afraid of tyranny of the majority, and they wanted to set up a system in which, there'd be a lot of direct election of elections would matter. People would have a say in what the government does, but certain things, because they're in the Constitution, would be off limits, right? Kevin Williamson once well described this idea of like everything in the Bill of Rights is the stuff that's too important for you idiots to vote on. Now, these issues do go forth all the way to the Supreme Court. So when we have a First Amendment, well, how do we define that? And what does it cover? And is there anything it doesn't cover? Hardcore pornography, child pornography, state secrets. There are a bunch of stuff where the government will say, actually, no, you can't. Can you restrict a demonstration? Well, if you're content neutral and it involves time, place, security issues, well, then it does make a... if the protest might infringe upon the constitutional rights of other people. Okay, well, now we have, these are legitimate issues that our government and our Supreme Court is there to hash out. His whole complaint is that, we can't function with the Constitution. Now, we've seen this over a wide variety of issues. You could argue, when the government calls up, Facebook or Twitter or some other social media company and says, hi, we've decided that post is disinformation and we'd like to see it taken down. And Facebook or Twitter say, yes, sir, we'll do that. That really does seem like an infringement upon the First Amendment. Like, it's one thing if the company independently says, we're not going to do that. Is it government directly suppressing speech? It gets to a gray area, but the functional result is the same. The government is telling people you can't say that. In the Second Amendment, large chunks of the country have basically treated the Second Amendment as optional. I will never forget seeing a poster put out by the American Civil Liberties Union, right? The whole point of them is they're supposed to be defending the constitutional rights of Americans. And it was this beautiful grid of 3 boxes across and 3 boxes down. Now, for those of you who aren't math majors, that comes out to 9 boxes. And so how many things are in the Bill of Rights? 10? Okay, so all of a sudden, one amendment got taken. Take a guess, people. Guess which amendment got left on. That's right, number 2. And so, what this guy is saying in his book and in this interview with Ross is to say, ultimately, we, the left, cannot get what we want with the Constitution the way it is. Therefore, we need to get rid of it and scrap it and start over again. By the way, every once in a while you find somebody on the right who's like, we need a second constitutional convention. I think it's a terrible idea. In part, if you feel like we're at a constitutionally illiterate time now, why would you want to put the public in charge? Like, they'll get rid of the Second Amendment. They'll get rid of the First Amendment. They'll get rid of, and you'll end up with a, constitutional right to recognition of the voting rights of trees or something like that. You'll get some absolutely nonsense, and then we'd have to negotiate them down to like a tree being 3/5 of a person or something. Because there's no precedent for those kinds of awkward compromises. Anyway, so you end up in a situation where at its heart, modern progressivism can't get what it wants with the Constitution in place. Now, if the First Amendment protects your right to say a whole lot of stuff, including, I think the Constitution stinks and we shouldn't have that anymore. Greg, watch that. This segment's going to be clipped out and going to be used against me as me saying, I think the Constitution stinks and we shouldn't have it anymore. But the idea is like, if you're Irving Schmidlap's a good person. I need to know if you're John Smith and you say the Constitution stinks, fine. But if you're a member of Congress, if you're in the cabinet, if you're president, if you're working for the civil service, if you're working for the armed services, you begin your employment by taking the oath of office, by saying to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And so to me, if you want to change the Constitution, that's not a violation of your oath. We have constitutional amendments all the time. That's fine. But if you basically are like, no, the Constitution is fundamentally unworkable and we need to scrap it and start over, I'm not sure that counts as preserving, protecting, and defending the Constitution. Now, I haven't run across it. I'd be very curious to see if anybody in Congress would see this argument and say, yes, we need to pack the Supreme Court. We need to abolish the Senate. We need to abolish the Electoral College, and we need to make wholesale changes to the Constitution. Because, again, everybody's going to draw the line differently, but I think that's in the neighborhood of violating your oath. If you want to get rid of the Constitution, you've already taken one oath to preserve, protect, and defend it.
Yeah, no, it's absolute madness. And you'd think a guy that writes for the New Republic would realize that there's an existing republic, which is exactly what the founding fathers want. And at one time, this magazine employed Fred Barnes and Mort Kondracki. Quite a change.
Yeah, it was Charles Krauthammer. It was a brilliant.
Charles Krauthammer.
The New Republic of the 80s was a murderer's row of great reporters, writers, and thinkers. And I guess around the Bush years is when I would say, the George W. Bush years is when it shifted. But yeah, and also like when he says the New Republic, he probably means the one that replaced the Galactic Empire.
Jim Geraghty, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Geraghty, spelled the right way. And I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Monday. Join us again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.